Well, thank you so much, Anne, and thank you everybody for joining me this afternoon. I'm really excited to be here today with all of you and to give this talk. So we have spent a lot of time so far today talking about wildfire, and I think it's one of the things that has kind of prompted this summit and these conversations. So this photo here was taken during the Thomas Fire in 2017. I did not take this photo, but this image is etched in my memory because at the time I was working for Cal OES here in the southern region, and Ventura was my assigned county. I live in Long Beach, so when it was time to deploy to Ventura County EOC on that night, December 4th, 2017, I got in my car, and this was, I had only been with the agency about 6 months, so this was my first major response, and I drove up the freeway, and it was about 10:30 at night. And as I came over that Conejo grade there, if you're familiar at all with going 101 north when you get into Ventura, this is image that I saw. And at the time, it was incredibly windy, and my vehicle was just, moving back and forth without me wanting it to. And I'm clutching the steering wheel, and I'm just driving over that hill and seeing this. And I drove into the Ventura County EOC, and I drove through a power outage. Nobody was talking about the power outage because everyone was talking about the fire and the wind and how quickly it was moving. But the power outage to me it'll be something I always remember because it was Christmas time. I had just finished decorating my Christmas tree, and there were a lot of Christmas decorations on people's lawns, a lot of the inflatables, but none of them were lit up. And so it felt eerily like Halloween, like October, and you had all these kind of shadowy looking decorations. And this always reminded me of kind of that jack-o'-lantern grin, looking at the flames over the hills. So I responded to the Thomas Fire. I was in the EOC for about 2 weeks before Christmas then. And at the time, it became the largest in terms of area wildfire in California history. This was 2017, and before that was the Cedar Fire, which was 2003. So it was 14 years the Cedar Fire had been the largest in California history. Well, the Thomas Fire was at the top of that list for about 8 minutes. And if you look at that list now, I think it's like number 9. And we're not even 10 years later after that. So, wildfires might be what brings us together today, but they're not the only hazard that we're exposed to, of course, here in Southern California. But they are a familiar one, and they do make a good case study for examining the story of resilience that is shared among all hazards. And that is something that I'm going to focus on today. I think it's, one of the most powerful insights that I've developed, and I want to share with all of you, is the power of story and storytelling. So we're going to have a little bit of story time about, some of the things that inspire me and drive me throughout my career. As Anne mentioned, I've been working in and around this field for almost 20 years, since 2007. So here's a story arc. So despite the chaos and the unique complexities, Crisis shares a common narrative arc that is not that different from your favorite film or novel. And my advice is, if we look for this, if we identify this, it can help to orient you during crisis and during disaster. It can help us find the rhythm that is so critical, and that cadence that helps stabilize and calm during these very difficult situations. And beyond this powerful arc where we're looking at kind of an inciting incident with a beginning and then all of the chaos and the climax in the middle of that incident, when you're really in the depths of it, to the end, the resolution, the recovery, the resilience, which is the longest part of the process. Beyond that, though, there are many human stories within those pages. And one of the quotes that I really like from a fellow emergency management colleague, some of you might know Kelly McKinney. He worked in New York City, so he's not local here, but he wrote a book a few years back called Moment of Truth. And the quote in that is, "The crisis shows a different side of itself to everybody. So there is never one story of disaster. There are always as many stories as there are people who were there. I think that's really insightful as we examine how we research disasters, but also how we respond and plan for them. I think there are protagonists that are charting a journey within disasters. There are individual stories, stories of families, stories of businesses, stories of organizations, and they all live within this broader story of response, recovery, and resilience. And there's a lot of power in these human-centered narratives. And I think, that is really what's most important to me to convey is some of that humanity and that emotion. And there were a couple of presentations that touched on that earlier that really resonated with me. I think our job is to pay attention and to listen to those stories and to learn from them. So one of the reasons I'm really excited to be at this summit when Anne and Zen approached me about this is because I actually come from a disaster research background. For those that don't know me that well, back in 2007, when I was bright-haired and bushy-tailed and eager to build a career, my aspiration was to be a disaster researcher. That was my goal. So many of you today that are in this room are living what my goal was when I was 20, So I really fell in love with disaster research during my time at Cal Poly Humboldt. I was a geography student, but I didn't really know, what I wanted to do exactly. I thought maybe urban planning or something like that. And then I had to pick a capstone project, and I chose to look at tsunami and earthquake preparedness and awareness up in Humboldt County, very exposed to those hazards. And I realized that I had a fascination with landscapes and how lives can change in an instant all across that landscape. So it was a very kind of geographical inroad to the field. And as I conducted that project, I did surveys, I did interviews. I started to really, really love that exhilaration of creating new data, those original data that nobody else ever had before, and they only exist because you asked the question and because you went out there and collected them. That was so exciting to me. The exploration of that uncharted territory and being able to, write and present and work with colleagues on these research projects. So I ended up pursuing a PhD in geography. I went to USC and studied under some professors there that did a lot of recovery work for Hurricane Katrina. So I got to do some pretty interesting projects using GIS and geospatial technology. And then I was also there during the station fire. And I did some research around communities and place attachment in the station fire. And even more recently, later in my career, I was still, even was looking to publish some research, even when I was at Cal State Northridge as their emergency manager. I was always wanting to collaborate with faculty, and we even did that recently with CSU. I think it's really important to bring, because in my current role with CSU, as Anne mentioned, I work really on the business and finance side of the house. I work with all the emergency managers. We don't work on a day-to-day basis with faculty, with academic affairs. It's kind of separated. There's business and there's academic. But I try to bridge that gap recently, doing a lunch and learn series with our emergency managers, inviting disaster researchers throughout the system to present their work to us, because I think it's really important. And that's one of the reasons I'm so happy, today I see among my people, both on the emergency management practitioner side and the researcher side. So while I was at USC, an opportunity came up for me to do an internship at City of LA Emergency Management Department. And that was really my first introduction to emergency management as a career path. I mean, I knew I was interested in disasters, but I started learning a little bit about EOC structures and planning, and my fascination kind of turned toward a whole new world. And that was how we manage and document emergency response. I fell in love with program implementation and the work of directly translating, and I've heard a couple of people kind of say this earlier, this idea of moving from awareness to action, right? How can we make a difference in our communities? And I felt like I was empowered to do that as a emergency manager, making a very practical impact on the ground that I wasn't sure that I would make in research. So I kind of shifted gears, and I ended up leaving UNC with a master's and not finishing the PhD because I fell in love with emergency management and decided to pursue this field where I very much view the role of an emergency manager as a convener. We bring people together across an organization, get people talking about these very real threats that a lot of people would probably rather ignore, right? And I feel like emergency management is that thread that ties together people from these different disciplines across organizations, the science, all kinds of different science from different disciplines, the software and the data, creating tools like this that give us real-time situational awareness. And that is so important. There's so much important and often undervalued work being done in emergency management. The communication and coordination between the EOC and the incident command post, that interface, the way we organize our EOCs, the way we train people. We had discussion about the GIS specialist role in the EOC and how that fits in. How we can incorporate the latest weather science into our planning and what those thresholds look like, pathways for information sharing and coordination. But perhaps of utmost importance are the systems and technology used for timely notifications that can save lives when minutes matter. So even with great technology, and we talked a little bit earlier also about alerting and technology that can sometimes fail us. But one other thing that's needed to implement this technology, a very human element, is the courage it takes to push the big red button during a big incident. And I witnessed this firsthand during that deployment to the Ventura County EOC for the Thomas Fire. That county, this was 2017, had done all the necessary approvals to go through the FEMA IPAWS system and to have that alerting authority. They had done training, they had the code that they needed, but they never used it before. However, this was also about 2 months after the October 2017 Santa Rosa area wine country fires, where alert and warning was a very hot topic, and they knew that they needed to act decisively and that they could send this wireless emergency alert, and it was going to reach way more people than just their emergency notification system, which is like an opt-in system, And so, I watched as they did it, and they sent it out, and everybody's phone went off within the EOC, and we heard that notice go out, and I have no doubt that lives were saved that night. And there is a lot of human emotion that goes into that, right? The anxiety before you do it, because what if you did put it in the wrong area or mess up the polygon in some way, and then, the relief afterwards when you send that out. So the city of LA and my time there as an intern showed me all of the great work that can be done in emergency management. But shortly after that, at age 26, while I was still forging my career, I was forced to get truly intimate with the human side of crisis and learn through vulnerability. So early 2012, I experienced a lot of kind of just stomach discomfort. And, I was 26 at the time. I didn't even have a primary care provider. It didn't even occur to me that I should go to the doctor, right? And I was working night shifts at the time, a company called NC4. And I thought, this is probably just my body's reaction to nights, or I'm drinking more coffee or something weird like that, right? But then one night, it was April 26th, the pain just got pretty intense, a lot of pain, a lot of bloating, and I decided to wait until my shift was done and then go to urgent care. When I went to urgent care, they said, you need to go to the emergency room. And so I went to the emergency room, and they ran different tests. They tried to understand what was happening, but something was blocking my intestines. And whatever that was had to be removed immediately, or my intestines could rupture and then I could get sepsis. And it was a life-threatening situation. So they put me first on the list for surgery at Olive UCLA Medical Center, and I had an emergency exploratory surgery. And what ended up being there was a tumor. And I didn't know it at the time when I had it, but afterwards I learned, and what the diagnosis was clear cell sarcoma. Something I've never heard of, and I'd be surprised if anybody in this room had, because sarcoma is responsible for about 1% of all cancers as opposed to a carcinoma, and clear cell sarcoma, maybe 1% of that. But it was the survival statistics that I Googled against the advice of my oncologist that really stopped me in my tracks, because the survival statistics for clear cell sarcoma, as they were in 2012, was a 56% survival rate at 5 years, a 33% at 10 years, and a 10% at 20 years, because they're known for long, late recurrence intervals. So at age 26, I was struck with this new reality that maybe I had a 10% chance of living to be 46. And that really changed the way that I approached my work. And I kept visualizing, very similar to that story arc that I showed at the beginning. I kept picturing, my story, and my greatest fear was that it would be cut short, that I wouldn't have that, graceful ending, that third chapter of, the third act, when everything's going toward the resolution in the story. I was afraid mine was just going to end with just a straight line. And so my challenge at that point was, how could I shape that ending if it had to be cut short? Maybe I didn't have as much time as I wanted to, but I could still not live a tragedy, right? I could turn my story into one of redemption and hope. I just had to reframe what that looked like. And that was really when I started viewing this work through that human-centered lens, through that narrative. And I started thinking about that 3-act story arc and comparing it to nightfall, when things are just getting dark. We talk a lot about blue skies and gray skies. Midnight, when you're really in the chaos and the thick of that disaster. And then dawn, when you start to see the sun on the horizon and you see that there will be a new future, maybe not the future you chose, but a new future that we can move toward hope and recovery. But crisis does not impact just one person. It impacts everyone in their lives. And this picture here is very grainy because it's a cell phone picture from 2012. But a lot of the balloons and flowers in my hospital room there that night. And so, that impacted more than just me. It definitely impacted my mother. And she did, a few months after the cancer, I remember she called me, and she was distraught. She was upset. Why did this have to happen to you? Why did this happen to my daughter? And she was calling me, asking me essentially, to support her, right? She was looking for a shoulder to lean on. And that felt very weird to me. I felt kind of guilty, like as the child that had, had the cancer, and now my mom was so distraught and in this horrible position. But it also felt unfair because I was the one that was directly having to grapple with this. It was in my body. I was still healing from the surgery. And that's when I discovered the ring theory paradigm in psychology. And that is not exactly like this, but it's concentric rings similar to this diagram here, where the individual who's most impacted is at the center of that. And then you draw concentric rings. So then maybe the next one out, the most inner one besides that, is like their family members. And then the one outside of that could be their neighbors or their colleagues. And you get so far and so forth. And one of the principles of this theory is that you seek support from people that are farther out than you on the ring. And I thought that really relates well toward disasters and this ripple effect that I have, noticed in my time working with disasters. They tend to ripple outward, both in geography and time. And I think that, this translates really well to wildfires because they don't stop at the burn scar, right? I mean, we talked a little bit about the impact of smoke throughout the region and just what a huge area can be influenced by that wildfire at the burn scar, ripples through entire communities. And during the Thomas Fire, I observed, you think about the people that lost their houses, but in that incident, a lot of those that lost their houses owned second properties. And they would then go to that second property and kick out their renters, and their renters were then displaced. So even though they didn't lose their home directly from the fire, now they're losing it indirectly. There were also avocado trees that burned in that. And you think, okay, well, that year's crop is gone, but it takes 5 years for a tree to grow to even be able to provide fruit again in the future. So that ripple through time is there too. So this has really made me think a lot about, who is impacted. And we talk a lot about, the impacted populations and disasters, right? So I created this visual last year during the wildfires, kind of, showing people of family members of those that lost their lives in the fire, those that lost their homes, those who were evacuated or lost their job or their school, first responders, and then families and friends of those impacted by smoke, just to kind of demonstrate. And then LAUSD families, that's a huge number. I couldn't tell you how many, but it's a lot of people. And school was closed for 2 days, right? So those people may not have lost their homes, but they were impacted. A lot of us were impacted. Those who received the false evacuation alert were impacted. I witnessed 3 car accidents that week, and that's because of just this heightened sense of anxiety in the entire community, not just, those that we might think of as traditionally impacted by wildfires. So if all these people are impacted, one of the most important things that we can research and address, I think, is the power of connection. In my research and my experience, people want to come together after disasters, and that is very powerful. I think people that come together routinely, we talked a little bit about which communities are prepared and what are some of the characteristics. That connection, that cohesiveness, that social community really contributes to resilience. People want to tell their stories and to commiserate. They want to honor old communities and create new ones. This is so core to resilience, both at an individual and a community level. I hope that we are starting to do this today. Some of the most important work doesn't happen in the EOC, it happens in living rooms and communities. One other thing related to this, witnessing after some of the wildfires, and we've talked a little bit around this concept, but sometimes there's this misconception that there's 2 groups, like responders and survivors, right? Like responders come in and they help the survivors. But I would argue that that's a very blurred line. And I would argue that sometimes survivors make some of the best responders. And I definitely have witnessed this in several disasters, but this one here at the Thomas Fire, pictures of donations after, new grassroots organizations that crop up after disasters are often founded by survivors, people that lost their homes, because they know, better than anybody else what's needed, right? And some of the research that I've done is how powerful this is in helping people to recover and to build their own story as a protagonist, a story of hope, right? And discover that sense of agency that they can do something. They're not just a survivor waiting there to be helped, right? They can actively use their own power to give back to the community. This is really powerful to me. And this viewing this in Ventura was amazing. And so many people came in and volunteered as a part of this effort. They were calling it the Amazon of Hope. Because people would come in and they would sort of write down what their order was, and then the volunteers would go in and find all those things throughout this warehouse that was sorted and then give it back to the person, whatever they wanted that they had ordered. I think that another thing that's occurring to me too is that sometimes, there was a talk earlier about emotional tolls of researchers. Why I think there's a huge emotional toll of responders too, right? And sometimes responders are survivors too. So sometimes survivors will start to respond, but also us, like in the EOC, we're impacted at home as well, And that's really been something that's become evident to me. So resilience is not built in a single agency, it's built in the gaps between agencies, between systems, and between jurisdictions. Today is critical because we are building new collaborations, new coalitions, new alliances. We're building a bridge between the work that we are doing. I have so many ideas for things that I think would be great for people to research, and I can't go into a lot of details because, time, but so many of the things I heard today, research around, how are families of responders impacted, children of responders, the emotional toll on that entire family unit. Recovery. Somebody mentioned, we don't talk about it enough. We don't research it enough either. That is the area where we have a lot of work to do, especially when I'm in small communities where they don't qualify for federal assistance. How are they doing recovery? False alerts and trust with the government agencies, crowdsourced information and misinformation, how we handle that, how we handle donations, like the slide I just showed. The role of community foundations in long-term recovery, I think, is really interesting, and how we can build those partnerships in advance to prepare for things. Real-time mapping, that sense of story, that sense of agency. Wildfires in urban areas, right? Not wildfire urban interface, but deep in urban areas, and wildfires that aren't in wildfire season, right? These are things that we're continuing to see, as well as the impacts of aging infrastructure and how we manage that going forward, and cascading and concurrent disasters, because they just keep happening. So let's examine what partnerships can be built, what resources can be pre-positioned, and how we can build resilient mindsets to fill those gaps. You can get so deep into the corners and the crevices of this field, it's endlessly fascinating to me. Multiple hazards, multiple phases, multiple geographies, multiple populations, all working in this field. We could be working on completely different things, but we're all in this field, right? Or worse, we could be working on a neighboring piece of the same puzzle and be so buried in our work that we aren't sharing the shapes, the clues, and the potential answers to your colleagues' questions. They might be in your hands. That's why these partnerships, these summits, and these opportunities for connection are paramount. So as I wrap up here, I'll share with you one practice that I've undertaken since the cancer experience is walking. I like to, put one foot in front of the other and feel like I'm getting somewhere. Right after the surgery, walking was all I could do. I couldn't run or lift weights or do anything else like that. And I like to book in the day with a walk. I like to witness the sunrise in the morning in the hope of a new day, and witness the sunset in the evening as the day fades to nightfall, and bear witness to this daily cycle. It inspires hope and guidance from both dusk and dawn. It reminds me, as I move forward one step at a time, resilience is not our destination, it's our journey. Thank you for walking with me on mine. Thank you. And as Anne mentioned, I have the QR code here, but it's also outside. My new book, this is my first time mentioning it publicly. I wrote this about 5 years ago, but publication takes forever. I'm working through it still right now, but this is coming soon. And if you want a copy, we'll mail it to you. You might even get it before May 19th, because this is a special kind of pre-launch event. But thank you all so much.